The Johnson family had never been particularly lucky when it came to real estate. Years of saving had barely put a dent in a down payment, and every house they could afford came with walls that felt too small, yards that needed constant work, and prices that made their heads spin. So when Mr. Johnson saw the listing for a swamp island, a tiny, marshy patch of land being sold for exactly $1, he couldn't help but laugh. $1, he said, showing the ad to his wife, Maria, and their 2 children, Ellie and Sam. Someone's joking. You can't buy land for $1. Not even a postage stamp costs that. Maria raised an eyebrow, always the more practical of the two. Maybe it's one of those abandoned lots. Probably full of snakes and mosquitoes. Exactly, Mr. Johnson said, grinning, which is why we need it. The kids giggled at the idea of owning their own island, imagining castles made of mud and secret treasure hunts in the reeds. Within a week, the family packed a small boat with essentials, tents, tarps, a few tools, and enough food to last a weekend, and made their way to the swamp. When they arrived, the laughter died down. The island was barely recognizable from the photos. It was smaller than they imagined, a tangled maze of reeds, mud, and stagnant water with half-submerged trees leaning at awkward angles. Mosquitoes buzzed angrily around them as if to welcome them to their new home. This is smaller than I expected, Maria said cautiously, stepping carefully across the soggy ground. Ellie wrinkled her nose. It smells like old mud. And we're going to live here? Sam asked, staring at a puddle that looked suspiciously deep. Mr. Johnson laughed, but he could feel his own apprehension creeping in. Still, he bent down to scoop a handful of mud and let it drip back into the water. It's fine, he said. It's ours, and I think we can make it amazing. The family spent the day exploring. They marked the driest spots to pitch a tent, examined the water channels, and imagined bridges and platforms floating over the marsh. Each muddy step brought splashes and giggles, especially when Sam and Ellie tried balancing on half-sunken logs. By sunset, the tiny island felt slightly less hostile. The golden light made the reeds shimmer, the birds returned from their evening flights, and the family started seeing possibilities instead of obstacles. As night fell, they sat in their small tent, listening to the croaks of frogs and the soft hum of insects. Their hands were covered in mud, their clothes smeared with dirt, but their hearts were full of excitement. This swampy patch of land, dismissed by everyone else, was their blank canvas. Here, they could build something truly theirs. Maria smiled at her husband. We might be crazy, she said softly. But we'll make it work, he replied. The children leaned against them, already dreaming of floating gardens, secret hideaways, and adventures only an island like this could hold. Outside, the moon reflected on the still waters of the swamp, and for the first time in a long time, the Johnsons felt like they were exactly where they were meant to be. The next morning, the Johnson family woke to the sound of frogs and birds, their little tent damp from the night air. The swamp had a strange kind of calm at dawn, the mist rising in thin ribbons over the water, reflecting the pale sunlight. Even the mosquitoes seemed slower in the cool morning, giving them a brief window to move without being bitten alive. Mr. Johnson had spent the night sketching ideas in his notebook. Platforms, barrels, wooden planks, anything that could float and hold soil. Maria had researched floating gardens on her phone, showing the kids pictures of plants growing on rafts in rivers far away. By breakfast, the family had a plan. They would build small floating islands first, easy to manage, stable, and capable of holding vegetables and flowers. The work began slowly. They dragged logs and branches from the edges of the swamp and gathered old barrels from a nearby shed someone had abandoned. The kids learned to tie knots, lashing the wood together, and the parents adjusted designs whenever a platform tipped or sank. Mud squelched under their boots as they tested each raft, stepping carefully to see how much weight it could carry. Some floated perfectly, some flipped, dumping everything into the water with a splash. Don't worry, Mr. Johnson said after one raft tipped over, sending Ellie shrieking as she ran out of the water, dripping mud from head to toe. We'll learn. The family laughed despite the frustration. Each mistake was a lesson, each failure a chance to improve. Maria guided Ellie and Sam as they planted seedlings in small trays of soil, carefully positioning them on the more stable rafts. Herbs first, then vegetables like lettuce, spinach, and carrots, testing which plants could thrive in this unusual environment. Days turned into weeks. Every morning, they paddled through the swamp, checking their floating gardens, adjusting weights, securing platforms with poles so they didn't drift too far. The kids grew bolder, stepping from raft to raft carefully, helping water the plants and removing leaves that had wilted. Maria experimented with flowers in shallow barrels, adding color and scent to the swamp, while Mr. Johnson reinforced the wooden edges and anchored the larger rafts so the wind wouldn't carry them away. By the end of the first month, the swamp looked entirely different. What had once been a dull, soggy patch of mud was now dotted with patches of green floating in neat, vibrant clusters. The rafts shimmered in the sun, flowers reflecting in the water, vegetables peeking above the edges of the soil. Birds began to land, inspecting the rafts curiously, and fish swam beneath the platforms, visible through the clear sections of water. Every evening, as the family sat together on the largest raft, tired and covered in mud, they marveled at what they had accomplished. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't easy, but slowly, the swamp was becoming their home. They weren't just surviving here, they were creating something entirely new. A world of floating gardens, a testament to their creativity, their determination, and their willingness to work together. And as the sun set behind the reeds, turning the water into a sheet of gold, the Johnsons realized they had built far more than rafts and plants. They had built hope, resilience, and a dream that was growing stronger every single day. Spring had arrived, and with it, the swamp had completely transformed. What had once been a muddy, mosquito-infested wasteland was now a vibrant patchwork of floating gardens. The rafts the Johnson family had built were covered with leafy vegetables, colorful flowers, and fragrant herbs, swaying gently in the breeze and reflecting perfectly in the still water. Birds swooped down, chirping and landing on the platforms, while fish darted beneath the rafts, visible through the clear water between them. The air smelled fresh and earthy, with a hint of blossoms, a far cry from the stagnant smell that had greeted them when they first arrived. The family moved through the swamp with ease now. Ellie and Sam hopped carefully from platform to platform, carrying small watering cans, while Maria checked the soil in each floating bed. Mr. Johnson reinforced edges where necessary and added poles to anchor the larger rafts more securely, all the while sketching plans for the next addition, a small flower garden that could float near the center of the island, creating a visual centerpiece. Neighbors who had once laughed at the idea of a $1 swamp island were now stopping by to see the miracle the Johnsons had created. Word had spread through the town. The crazy family that had bought a soggy patch of land was now growing thriving gardens on the water. Some visitors were curious, others skeptical, but all were amazed. People who had mocked them months ago now asked questions, eager to learn how they had managed to turn mud and reeds into a flourishing ecosystem. The children loved showing off their work. Ellie guided visitors across the narrow paths between rafts, explaining which plants grew best on floating platforms and how they balanced the weight to prevent tipping. Sam demonstrated how to secure seedlings in soil trays and even helped craft a few mini rafts for visitors to take home. The family laughed together as they shared their knowledge, their previous hardships now transformed into pride and joy. By mid-morning, the Johnsons were harvesting fresh vegetables and herbs, filling baskets with lettuce, spinach, carrots, basil, and mint. Maria cooked a simple meal right there on the largest raft, using a small portable stove. The aroma of sautéed vegetables mixed with the scent of flowers and wet earth, creating an almost magical atmosphere. They ate together, the kids' laughter echoing across the swamp, reflecting off the water like music. Evenings were quieter, but no less magical. The family would sit together on the largest platform, watching the sun sink below the horizon and the water turn golden, dotted with the colors of flowers and greenery. The swamp had become more than a home, it was a sanctuary, a living testament to imagination, hard work, and determination. They had built something unique, a blend of nature and creativity, where each floating garden represented not just plants, but resilience and hope. The Johnsons had started with $1 and a dream. Now, they had created a paradise in the middle of a swamp, a place where nature thrived and their family thrived with it. The neighbors' awe, the birds' songs, the fish beneath the rafts, they all confirmed one thing. A swamp island bought for $1 could become a world full of life, color, and possibility, all because a family refused to give up on a dream.